So you installed a SharkBite fitting, you turn the water back on, and now you've got a drip. Maybe it's a slow weep, maybe it's a steady, when it actually makes sense to reuse a SharkBite fitting versus when you should just replace it. That one lesson alone has saved me from a lot of headaches. Let's get into it. SharkBite fittings are one of the best things to happen to home plumbing because they let you make solid connections without soldering or expensive crimping tools. But here's the thing. Most leaks aren't caused by a bad fitting. They're caused by one of these 6 mistakes. And once you know what to look for, fixing the problem is usually pretty straightforward. Before we jump into the mistakes, let me give you a quick understanding of how a SharkBite fitting actually seals. Inside every SharkBite fitting, there's a small rubber O-ring. When you push a pipe into the fitting, that O-ring wraps around the outside of the pipe and creates a watertight seal. There are also stainless steel teeth inside that grab onto the pipe and hold it in place. So for pipe pushed in far enough so the O-ring is sitting in the right spot. Every single one of the 6 mistakes we're about to cover comes back to one of those 2 before you push the fitting on. Unless you're working with brand new pipe straight out of the packaging, your copper pipe is going to have some discoloration, maybe some oxidation, dust, or grime on the surface. Smooth, clean copper to seal properly. Any debris or buildup on the pipe can create a tiny gap between the O-ring and the pipe, and that's all it takes for a drip to start. Here's what you want to do. I actually called their technical support line to ask about this, and the technician told me that plumber's sanding cloth is perfectly fine. The reason they warn against sandpaper is because regular sandpaper is much more aggressive and can actually score or damage the copper or reduce the diameter of the pipe. A few passes to get it clean and shiny is all you need. Mistake number 2 is not cutting the end of the pipe straight. Whether you're working with copper or PEX, PEX, rhymes with flex, the cut end of that pipe needs to be a clean 90 degrees. It can't be on an angle. That flat end is what allows the pipe to seat properly inside the fitting, so the O-ring can seal evenly all the way around. Standard pipe cutter. You clamp it onto the pipe and rotate it around, tightening a little each time until it cuts through. That gives you a nice square end almost every time. If you have to use a hacksaw because of tight space, you'll need to be much more careful to keep that cut straight, and you'll definitely want to clean up the end with your sanding cloth afterward. For PEX pipe, you can use a pipe cutter as well, but I'll tell you from experience, it takes a while to rotate it around and around on PEX. That's why I eventually bought a PEX cutting tool. Now, here's where I ran into trouble early on. PEX pipe comes in a coil, so it has a natural curve to it. Holding it straight enough to get a clean 90-degree cut with the PEX cutter takes some practice. My first few cuts were slightly angled, and I didn't think much of it at the time, but those fittings leaked. Take your time, hold the pipe as straight as you can, and make sure that cut end is flat before you move on. By the way, if you're finding this advice helpful, you should know it's just a small sample of what I've put into my new guide, The Ultimate Plumbing Playbook. It's packed with step-by-step instructions for hundreds of repairs that can save you thousands. To grab your copy, you can scan the QR code on the screen right now, or just use the first link in the description below. All right, let's continue. Mistake number 3 is skipping the reaming step. And this was the Biggest source of leaks I ever had was SharkBite fittings. When I first started using them, I was trying to save a few bucks, and I didn't buy the SharkBite reaming tool. A big mistake. Here's why it matters. When you cut a pipe, especially PEX with a cutting tool, the cut-in isn't perfectly smooth. There can be a slight ridge or burr left behind. That uneven edge prevents the O-ring from making a complete seal around the pipe, and you end up with a leak. The SharkBite reaming tool has a small cutting disc that protrudes into each of its openings. You fit it over the end of the pipe and rotate it around, and that disc shaves off any burr or rough edge, leaving you with a perfectly smooth end. I called SharkBite technical support about this one too, and the technician told me flat out that this is a critical step you must not skip. Use it on every pipe end, whether it's copper or PEX. Once I started reaming every single cut, my leak problems almost completely disappeared. You'll actually be able to see the thin shaving of material that comes off the pipe when you use the tool. That little bit of material is what was keeping your fitting from sealing. Mistake number 4 is not marking the correct insertion depth on the pipe. The reaming tool actually doubles as a depth gauge, and this is something I wish I had known from the start. When I first began working with SharkBite fittings, I would just use a measuring tape to figure out how far the fitting needed to go onto the pipe. That was a big mistake because I was never quite accurate enough. I'd push the fitting on and then wonder, did I push it far enough? Am I a 1/16 of an inch short? With SharkBite fittings, that kind of guessing leads to leaks. Here's the right way to do it. Take the reaming and depth tool, fit it over the end of your pipe, and use a permanent marker to draw a line on the pipe right at the edge of the tool. That line tells you exactly how far the fitting needs to go. I always mark it on 2 sides of the pipe so I can see the line no matter what angle I'm looking from. When you push the SharkBite fitting on, you push until the fitting reaches that line. No guessing, no wondering. You know it's seated correctly. Mistake number 5 is not pushing the fitting all the way onto the pipe. Even if you mark the depth, a good firm push to fully seat, especially the original style fittings. If you stop a hair short of that mark, the O-ring might not be in the right position to seal completely. One thing I've found is that the newer SharkBite Max fittings are noticeably easier to push on than the originals. They take less force, which is a real help when you're working in a tight spot or your hands are a little tired. Whichever style you're using, once you've pushed the fitting on, check that line. If the lighting isn't great where you're working, grab a flashlight or even use your phone camera to zoom in and confirm the fitting is all the way to the mark. I know this sounds like overkill, but a 2-second check can save you from pulling out drywall later. Trust me on that one. Mistake number 6 is cutting a pipe segment too long. This one caught me off guard the first time it happened. If you have a short section of pipe running between 2 SharkBite fittings, which is pretty common when you're doing a repair, you need to measure that segment very carefully. If it's even a little too long, it forces the pipe to sit at a slight angle inside the fitting on each end. That tilt prevents the O-ring from sealing evenly around the full circumference of the pipe, and you get a leak. I ran into this exact problem when I was working on our powder room. I had a short piece of pipe between 2 fittings, and I cut it just a touch too long. Sure enough, it leaked. Once I recut that section to the correct length and reinstalled it, the leak stopped completely. So when you're measuring a segment that goes between two fittings, account for the insertion depth on both ends and be precise. It's better to double check your measurement than to have to drain and redo the connection. Now let's talk about what to do if you've made one of these mistakes and need to remove a pipe from a SharkBite fitting. This is important because there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. Only use the approved disconnect clip or disconnect tongs made by SharkBite. You push the clip or tongs against the release collar on the fitting while pulling the pipe out. It can take a fair amount of effort, especially with the original fittings, so be patient and work carefully. You don't want to damage the fitting or scratch up the outside of the pipe. Now here's the question everyone asks. Can you reuse a SharkBite fitting after you've removed it? SharkBite officially says their fittings are not intended for reuse. And I understand why they say that. Every time you remove and reinstall a fitting, the O-ring and the teeth inside go through additional wear, and that increases the chance of a failed seal. That said, in my experience, I've removed a SharkBite fitting and reinstalled it on the pipe, and most of the time it's sealed just fine. But here's my personal rule. If I've had to take a fitting on and off more than twice, I replace it with a new one. At that point, the few dollars for a new fitting isn't worth the risk of a slow leak behind a wall. That's not official SharkBite guidance. That's just what I'm comfortable with based on my own experience. You can make your own call on that. Now, for that bonus tip I promised you at the beginning. Before you reinstall or install any SharkBite fitting, take a flashlight and look inside the fitting itself. Specifically, check that the O-ring is still in place and that it looks clean and undamaged. If you drop the fitting on the floor, if there's any grit or debris inside, or if the O-ring looks pinched or nicked, that fitting is not going to seal. I keep a small can of compressed air in my tool bag, and I give the inside of the fitting a quick blast before every installation. It takes 3 seconds, and it clears out anything that shouldn't be there. I also put a tiny dab of silicone lubricant on the O-ring, which helps the pipe slide in smoothly and seats the O-ring evenly. This is something a lot of plumbers do, and it's made a noticeable difference in getting leak-free connections on the first try. Before you go, I want to make sure you know about my complete guide, the Ultimate Plumbing Playbook. It goes way deeper than we can in a single video, with 85 pages covering everything from clearing any clog to replacing your own water heater. If you want to stop wasting money on simple fixes, this book is for you. Just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description to get your copy. Thanks for watching. And if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one.